All right, welcome everyone. We are thrilled to be kicking off our April NIALI webinar series with guest speaker Rich Seiler. And we'll give everybody a few minutes just to get on the call here. And while we do, I'm going to just go over a couple of housekeeping notes. So first off, we do have all of our past webinars available on our website if you'd like to go back and watch this session after we've recorded it, or past webinars we've had. They are at our website, niali.com/events. You can also find them on our YouTube channel. So if you aren't able to make it live today, definitely come on after and catch the recording. I also want to put out a save the date for our next webinar, which will be May 28th. We are excited to be welcoming guest speaker Stan Chu, the Director of Integrated Project Delivery with HDR. And this topic is going to be all about design and construction and can you plan design and construction? So we will have the registration link out very shortly for this. We're a little behind schedule, but stay tuned to our event page. I will have that up in the next couple of days. And with that, I'd like to welcome Rich Seiler, Chief Improvement Officer at Unified Works. And just a little housekeeping note for everybody on the webinar today. We do have a copy of Rich Seiler's book to give away, and we will give that away to whoever asks the best question during Q&A. So stay tuned for that, and we'll let Rich pick the answer for the best question. And with that, I will pass it over to Rich and Alan for today's discussion.
All right, thank you, Laura. So Alan Boyku here. I'm with NIALI, and I'm thrilled to have Rich on the call today to talk about the team aspect of construction. So, Rich, why don't we start by how did you get into construction? Maybe some of your background in coaching in both sports and construction. So, how you got here today?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me, and good morning, everybody. You guys hear me loud and clear?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Well, my family was in the business, so I was working in the construction industry when I was a kid. So humping concrete, tipping over wheelbarrows, that kind of thing. So I got about 40 some odd years right now under my belt. And I've worked pretty much in the field through the corner office. I've kind of done just about everything that you can do in the business. I just have a fondness for being in the field, and that's kind of why I chose, getting into pool plant coaching, because I live in trailers, and that's where I prefer to be. So that's pretty much my story, and again, I'm glad to be here.
All right, perfect. Yeah, when we were talking about this conversation, we were sort of going, wow, this is really interesting. Yeah, they're teams, but construction teams and sport teams, they have similarity in that people need to work together, but there's also differences. Do you want to just kind of set the table here a little bit on similarities, differences, and then we'll get into some of the nuance?
Sure. Is it okay if I throw out a question to the team right now before we do that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I was curious, those that are on the call, what prompted you to, what interests you about the topic? Like, why did you decide to get on this call? Can I hear from some people, please? First one, talk wins.
Yeah, they'll have to use the chat. They won't have access
Well,
to
put it in the chat.
Read
Andy,
your book. Perfect.
Andy, good. Thank you for saying that. Hopefully you found it helpful. Anybody else have any chat they want to add? Sean Marston's saying, hi, little buddy. I'm 6'3", 250 pounds, and he calls me little buddy. That tells you about him.
Yeah, that's right.
Anybody else? I thought it'd be interesting just to understand. So the question was, I think, so to sort of compare and contrast like sports teams and construction teams. Is that the question?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an interesting way of then kind of honing in on the construction team. I think that your experience, because obviously you brought some of the sports experience into the trailers. I mean, I see you.
Yeah, so I probably got 100 or more of these balls floating around the country, because I really felt like, it was such a team sport that's what really prompted me to really get into it, is that I felt that this process allows us to create teams And the way I look at it is, when a general contractor hires a bunch of trade contractors, they all have different motives. They all have different P&L sheets. They don't necessarily come together as a team, right? I mean, everybody's kind of got their own little private interests.
Mm.
And so the trick is, how fast can you make a group of teams become one team? And we don't have a lot of time to practice like sports teams do, where they work together for years. They got coaching, and they just get to know one another and they work well together. We have to do it fast, on the fly, and it's all money ball. So it's tough to create a team, but I'm a big believer that the fundamental components of the last planner system allows us to engage members and turn it into a team. So to me, that's the difference. And it's a big deal because I spend a lot of time on different sites, and I'm out in Princeton right now doing a $1 billion science building with Whiting Turner, and it's in trouble. Job's in trouble. And they got about 20 weeks left to get a whole bunch of work done, and the contractors are pissed. Everybody's in a bad mood, and that is definitely not a team, okay? So we're trying to do what we can as fast as we can to make it a team. So to me, it's about what can we do in the last planner setting that can allow us to get people to move in the same direction. And then the final thing I'll say on that is, just like in football or any other sport, somebody has to do somebody has to do their job so you can do your job, right? The center's got to snap the ball, the guard's got to block, somebody's got to do this, somebody's got to do that. It's the exact same thing in construction. Every trade has a predecessor, and that's why we call that a handoff. Okay, so
Yeah,
even
exactly.
even that term, I hope I answered your question, sir.
Yeah, I did. I think, the handoff is a perfect metaphor, and it has to be done properly. Promise that you are going to hand it off, right? The quarterback doesn't just decide to go do his own thing, well, unless something falls apart. So it's a plan. So why don't we talk a little bit about the system and the planning? Like as a sports coach, you would create a system based around the talent you've got, for example. What system do you use in the construction team?
Well, first, let me say, you mentioned quarterback, and I always talk about the owner's the quarterback. And when you get on project teams, those on the call know what I'm saying is true. That's oftentimes um, owners take a aloof position, and they can't because they're the quarterback. But
Mm.
anyway, as far as the system goes, I guess could you please explain that a little further, because I'm not sure what you asked.
Well, I'm thinking I'm thinking of the last planner system,
Okay,
and I'm thinking of your book, the pole planning playbook, and clearly it's a metaphor for, I mean, right on the front cover you've got a football play plan.
got it.
So is that the start of building the team? Like, how does that play out?
Yeah, so let's talk about it. When you first get a group of people together, let's say you're lucky enough to start at the very beginning and you got all your trade contractors. I call it right sizing your roster.
Mm.
Okay. The first thing you got to do is make sure you got the right people in the huddle. Okay. And as funny as that may sound, a lot of times we start planning, and maybe those on the call might recognize this. You realize you're missing a couple players,
Mm.
and missing one player, so making sure you got the right roster. And by the way, when you're trying to build a winning team of any sort, it all starts with the talent of the players on the team. And another thing that makes it difficult, I think, for us is that there's a lot of low bid winners. I mean, we compete for these positions, these contracts, so you're bringing in low bidders. You don't necessarily have an opportunity to find out, am I getting the best people? And then you get a company and you go, yeah, they're a good company, but do you know the personnel that's actually going to show up on your job? So when you start early and you get in the room and you start doing let's say a milestone plan, or you have some milestones and you want to start shaking out scope, sequence, and duration for a certain amount of phases, people are in the room, they're working together, they're standing up, they're shoulder to shoulder, they're looking each other in the eye. There's a high degree of accountability, and I think accountability is a key function of a good high-performing team.
So, like, from in your experience, how many of your project teams have been high performing, and was it some of the things you did, or was it the team members, and or did you have low performing teams and threw up your hands and go, man, I don't know what I'm going to do with this motley crew? Um, Give us some
Well,
of your contrast experiences there.
I've had my share of those, and sometimes people ask me what I do for a living, and I tell them I'm a lion tamer. Because you get in a room and some old school habits are hard to kick, right?
Mm,
Um, Here's what I think happens with good, prideful people. Um, we start to make what we call promises in the form of a sticky tag, right? So
mm,
I'm making a promise and I'm looking you in the eye and saying, and you follow me, tell me what you need. I'll tell you, I can give it to you or I can't. So I just feel there just starts to be a more personal bond in the room. And, on a project that lasts a while, and I'm on a lot of large projects, I mean, guys become friends, so maybe they know each other from another job, stuff like that. But I really believe that when they start making commitments to one another, they get to hold themselves accountable. So to me, that's a very big component of the whole thing. And also, we force them to be prepared. Sports teams, and when they're not practicing, they're studying, they're looking at film, they're looking at drawings, so to speak, right? They're understanding what's going on. So when you show up to practice, you got to be ready to perform. And then you have the games, right? So practice and games are different in sports. We don't get practice. You know what I mean?
mm,
It's game
true.
time. It's game time.
Yeah.
And so, how fast can you get a bunch of guys and women in the room that are going to come together? I personally have never seen a better way of doing it. And sometimes it's personality. Um, the personality of the superintendent has that ability to lead people. So I oftentimes talk about the last planner system being a sociological, psychological thing as well as somewhat
Mm.
scientific, right? It's how we get people to interact and communicate that's the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, that topic came up quite a bit at the most recent Last Planner conference that the Lean Construction blog held. They talked about culture and team. And that's in the chat. There's been a couple of comments that people are. You asked what's motivating people to come and listen to us talk here, and a couple have said, "I'm just interested in can I take some of these things from the sports world? How do I, get them into the trailer?" And one of the things that you're talking about, I just want to know if I heard you right, is actually level setting at the start, saying, here's the expectations, here's the team, here's your responsibilities, being on time, being prepared. Like, are those the types of things that you would say, that's at the start? I know when you come in when the other coach was fired and you come in, it's different, but we'll talk about that in a second because you're
Yeah,
talking about a project. But yeah, just lay it out how you start and come in the
that's a
room
good
and
point. That's a good point, Alan. Thank you. My typical kickoff, because I'm just calling it kickoff because it's our first session together.
right.
Um, I have a slide deck and all the things you're talking about. I go over it. And by the way,
Oh.
you don't just go over it once. This is something, everything that we learn in life comes through repetition. And
Hmm.
if you can have repetition with informed feedback, now you can get somewhere. So I kind of laid down the rules of the road very early on, and I keep harping on them over time. So you got to make people aware of what it is we're about to do, and you got to ferret out the naysayers. There's a term I hear all the time is you got to get buy-in. If you don't get by, if anybody raise your hand on the chat if that's some description you ever heard about trying to get people to execute the last planner. You got to get buy-in. So I spend as much time as possible early on trying to figure out who's not in. I mean, I'm not, I don't have any authority. I don't have any power. You know what I mean? I'm just a hired gun, but I can't fire anybody. Although I have been instrumental in helping some people get moved on to another better place. But um, I'm just saying, you got to listen to the junk. Start out. I oftentimes start out and say, hey, who's done this before? Right? Tell
Hmm.
me what your experience. 15 years ago, nobody knew what the hell this was. I mean,
That's true. Yeah.
I'd come in there with a bunch of blank stickies and toss them around, and people looked at me like I was insane. It's different now because it's proliferated. Now the struggles I run into are people say, "Oh yeah, I know how to do that. I know how to do pool planning. I got it." I call it the "I got it" syndrome. So honestly, again, as much as you can spend up front just letting people know what it is, and also just like any other training or coaching, when people do things you're asking them to do, you congratulate them, you reward them, you recognize them. And you also have to be able to stand up and say, no, that's not the way it goes. We don't do it that way. This is the new way. So I feel that starts to create team. Can I just mention this Princeton job again? Because
Absolutely.
I've been out there about 6 weeks, 2 days a week. And I almost didn't take the assignment because I knew the job was in trouble, and I know what the Jersey labor market's like. Hopefully there's some Jersey people on the call. But I just came back yesterday from this trip, and I walk around the job site. I have the guys on the foreman like grab me and go, "Rich, I'm so glad we're doing this, man. Thank you for coming." And everybody was concerned that they weren't going to buy in. They're
Mm.
looking. They're looking for a leader. They're looking for a way to create more certainty. And you know what? Most guys on a job, they like sports. They get it. But you can use
Mm.
music. You can use music, right? If you got an orchestra, people have to play together in sync. So
Mm-hmm.
all we're trying to do is get everybody to work in unison.
Exactly, exactly. So in from that perspective, I mean, it sounds like you're an educator as well. Like how much of your time is spent sort of teaching the system, and in this case, Last Planner, is that part of it?
Yeah, I mean, when I'm on a project for a fairly extended period of time, we always start the session off with a learning moment.
Okay.
I'm very fortunate that my wife's has a master's degree in curriculum development
Mm.
and also special ed. So that's why she probably married me. But um, so we've spent time developing curriculum, and I'm kind of a closet egghead because I'm an adjunct professor at Northwestern University where I teach this. So I kind of try to stay sharp on the educational aspect of teaching field guys. And adult learners aren't like teaching high school or grammar school kids. Adult learners got to hear things about 5 times. so
Yeah,
so
that's right.
there is a lot of repetition and focus on key fundamentals that I constantly go back to.
So give an example in your recent memory of those learning moments, like just a few little, you know, things that you've said. And this is again for people that are kind of looking for some techniques from you.
Okay, so I'm sure everybody on the horn has heard the term conditions of satisfaction.
Hmm.
Um, what we try to do in our planning meetings is to make sure that so a particular point to answer your question, the successor predecessor relationship. Okay, um, everybody I always ask people, hey, raise your hand if you ever show up on a job site to do your work and you can't do it because the work in front of
Mm.
you is wrong or incomplete.
So a
Guess
very
guess
real example, right?
guess how
Yeah.
many people raise their hand?
Mm.
Oh, everybody. And then I say, look, if you don't raise your hand, you're probably new to this business or you're lying because, um, and I say, okay, if that's the case, why is that the case? Why is it the case that you can't work because the work in front of you is wrong? And most people start saying it's because people don't know what it is that I need. Okay. And I always say, yeah, and there's a chance that they don't care either. And that's the brutal truth of it too. And I'm sure people on the call can provide examples of that. So, so we start to zero in on when you build a face pull, it's very simple, really. I'm going to do X, but I need X in front of me, right? And so once you get them to really get that, and they start to realize that now they're going to talk, and then they say, so when you give me work, here's what I need. And that's, by the way, that's the pull. That's the total pull. The next step in the process is the customer, and it goes back and forth. So that's the big learning moment. Once people get that this system allows them to work like that, there's a lot more clarity, um, in communication and coordination.
Is there a point where you can almost step back and you go, my job is done here? They get it. Because, like you say, they've got the mindset, they come in and go at it. Like, is there ever a tipping point?
Yeah, that's a good question too. Sometimes people say, "Hey, how many?" Sometimes it's a money thing. How many sessions will it take?
Yeah, right.
And I'm like, how many sessions will it take for you to learn how to play the piano? I mean, it depends on your propensity, your talent, your equipment, all those things, right?
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I work myself out of a job like all the time. Fortunately,
Mm,
we do some good work, so we get invited back here and there. But so yeah, I hope I answered your question there. We try to train the trainer the best we can. By the way, the large national organizations, and I work with a great percentage of top E&R companies, they have a hard time proliferating the last planner system throughout their entire enterprise. So we're working on that with some people, but to me,
yeah.
it's about standardizing the process. And if you do any homework on Lean or Toyota, you'll see that they believe in standards because it's repeatable, it's teachable, and it gives you a benchmark. So I'm a real stickler on fundamentals. And frankly, for those who know me, I feel like I've taken the early stages of Last Planner and turned it into something different because it's thousands of reps in the field getting my butt kicked to understand how to actually execute this.
Yeah, and I like what you've said, and I've heard it from other thought leaders, Rich, and that is my job is to work myself out of the job. I think that's really just really healthy. And I think that's part of your success. So I have a very odd question.
Uh-oh.
Sp sports teams, it's clear who they're playing against, and it's clear how they're going to win. They're going to get more points or whatever the game is. Like in terms of construction teams, like who are they competing with? Like, how do you, because a sports team rallies together to beat those guys. What's the construction team rallying around?
That's a great question. It makes me wish this was more of an interactive call because I sure would love to hear what other people have to say about that. But
We can
um,
try that another time.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I call this the universal logo of the construction industry. Okay. People are always pointing fingers at
Mm.
everybody else. Um, so how do you get people to move in the same direction? I just lost my thought. What was your question again, real quick?
Well, it's like, what is the gist of it? What is a construction team rally around? It's not
Okay.
about
Well, how
beating
do you know you're
beating the
winning?
other team. Yeah,
Yeah. How do you know
yeah.
you're winning? So again, look, from my experience, decades and decades in this business, is that sometimes we're playing against each other. Like people come in and they're protecting their own space, their own work. That makes it very challenging to try to turn that into a high
Mm,
performing team when, look, everybody's got a purse and everybody's trying to protect that purse, right? So it's very difficult to determine how you're winning. I mean, I think if we could ask that question out loud, somebody might say, well, it's under budget and schedule. You know, that's how we know if we're winning. Well, it's hard to know if you're winning until you're either won or you're lost in that respect. We have to come up with a better way to say, and by the way, I think somebody could argue that the team plays against the owner. And I know that sounds funky, but I mean, a lot of times I think that it's something that we all have to kind of determine for ourselves. How do we know if we're winning? But I can tell you this, anybody that's been on any number of projects can say, I remember this one project, it was a great project. You know what I mean? We won because everybody worked together, we talked, we communicated, we took care of problems efficiently. So it's almost like the competitor could be anybody. It could be internally. And look, even in a football team, there's some healthy competition between the players on their own team. But
mm,
when it comes game time, you were right, Alan. It's us against you, and we win with more points on the board. So,
yeah,
anyways, I suppose it'd have to come down to budget and schedule. It's quality,
yeah, yeah.
safety.
Sorry, I got knocked off the call for a second there, but I got the end of your comment. Let's we're going to be heading into Q&A, and I know you want it to be more interactive with people anyway, which is great. But can we just sort of tie things up with some you gave us one example where at the start you do learning moments. Are there other little sort of tips and tricks that are part of your toolkit, so to speak, that you can share with people?
Yeah, I mean, I use educational exercises, but I try to
Okay.
make them 10, 15 minutes long, but it's going to be a reinforcement of something that we already learned. Again, because it just really takes some patience and persistence to get people to learn this, because as simple as it may be, it's very difficult. Um, and by the way, I think to just put a plug into Nally, I think that you guys are doing a great job creating a system that can help us continue to expedite team behavior.
Mhm.
But so I do a lot of training along the way, and I want to make sure. Again, I'm just going to say informed feedback. So you got to have somebody. And by the way, I can't tell you how many times I've been told by people I know how to do the last planner, and then I go out there and I watch and I observe, and it's just not true.
Mm.
They're not doing it. So almost like constant reps, Alan. You just
Yeah.
everybody run the
It's
play, run the play. Let me watch and let me comment.
Is that because it's hard? Like Last Planner is hard, or is it that you really need to intimately understand it to actually adopt it one step at crawl, walk, run? Like what is it about that observation you're making that they just aren't practicing it properly?
Foreign. Well,
Mm.
it's not. It was foreign. It's still sort of foreign. Look, a lot of guys don't know about it, or you can. When I ask who's done this before, I'll get some hands up and I say, "What's your take on it?" And they say it sucks. The last job I was on, no, I'm not kidding. Why? Tell me why. What
Yeah.
happened? And what it turns out is they weren't taught correctly. They didn't
Mm.
learn it. They didn't learn it properly. And I'm just going to say, I just went through this yesterday in the last 6 weeks that the main superintendent, who's a real um, pusher kind of guy, he was totally against this. And after a few sessions, he said, "Rich, we didn't learn this. Like
Wow.
we were told to use the last planner system, but nobody really ever came out and explained it to us like you are." And
Wow.
because there's so many components of it, you have to have some time on the field, which means you got to have enough sessions that you can start to not just repeat stuff, but add the new nuances to what takes this to the next level. You can't underestimate how much a superintendent needs to learn how to be a facilitator.
Yeah, right on. Well, I know your book is very easy to read and it really breaks it out fairly simply. We'll move into our questions and answers. And just a reminder, best question gets a copy of the book. If you don't answer the best question, you can go to the Unified Works website. You can still order those, right, Rich? Or is it on Amazon, or how could people get
No,
that to?
just go to our website, please, if you want that.
Okay, so
Um,
Unified Works is the website.
Unified, I think it's Unified Dash Works, but I don't plug my own website in very often. So
No, I just think your comment about the adoption and understanding of Last Planner, you've written there's a resource there for people. So let's share it.
yep.
So let's
People,
open things up to questions and we'll hopefully get some answers for you.
come on, throw some stuff at me.
Looks like Laura just put a link for the book uh, in the chat if you want to get that. Oh, there's a question from Cam. Oh, hi, Cam. Rich, what would be your most successful method for bringing the team together with owners and builders when the contract is far from collaborative approach?
So if, I'm assuming what you're saying is you're not doing an IPD or something like that. You're in a pretty much of a conventional contract, right? Um,
Yeah.
I think that any team, anywhere, anyway, starts to come together when they spend a lot of time together, right?
Mm,
And then you have to have purpose when you're spending time together, Cam. But I think, honestly, on a very simple level, how often are you getting together with everybody, including the owner, especially the owner, and a designer, the typical adversarial triangle, the owner, the contractor, and the architect. You got to spend some time together and have some heart to hearts. It's got nothing to do with the last planner. It's got to do with human beings coming together and looking at each other and deciding, are we going to work together or not? And then, ask people like, how do you feel? How do we make this better together? And I hope that that's not too fuzzy wuzzy or esoteric, but I really think that we get traction by doing that early and often.
Yeah, I think I don't think it's fuzzy. I think you're making an important point that this comes from the top. And that triangle of people is about setting the culture, setting the stage. Here's how we're going to behave, right? And that's what you're saying, which makes total sense.
Well, if you look at the 4P model of the Toyota Way, you'll notice that the very bottom of the triangle is philosophy, right? And
Hmm.
and I use the word philosophy in conjunction or in unison with culture and also morale. So they know that everything's built on that philosophy. And then you go to people, and then you go to problem solving, right? So I'm just saying, like, you have to start there. And it's hard. It's not easy. Everybody on this call knows that. It's hard to bring all those different commercial factions together to truly operate together.
Yeah. I think you've partly answered this question already in your previous comment, but Rick's asking, do you find it a challenge to move away from command control to collaboration? And, do other people find that a challenge, and how do you have that conversation with them?
Yeah, that's a great question because this industry is essentially command and control.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
and so it has been for as long as I've ever been in it. Um, you know, Times are changing, and I mean, I remember when there was fist fights on jobs. You know what I mean? There was some
The
melees
good
going
old
on.
the good old days.
Yeah, in fact, I don't know if I preferred that or not compared to this one, but
That's right.
um, I just lost my thought. So say it again.
It's about command and control that,
Okay, yeah, I'm looking at
yeah.
your thing, Rick. So it's command and control, top down, bottom up, right? So it's hard because people aren't used to that. Trade contractors, and I have a lot of buddies, drinking buddies that are trade contractors that complain about the general contractors all the time. Um, because they say that they tell me what to do, but they don't know what I do. You know what I mean? They're telling me your work this, go faster. We got a different duration. You have to realize that in this model, we take the typical org chart and we turn it upside down and we put the production workers at the top, and they're the value creators. They're the
Mm.
ones that are experts in the work that they do. Okay, so that it is difficult, Rick, because you're asking people to look at things in a completely with a paradigm shift, like 180. Um, and I do spend a lot of time on it. And guess what? If you get a bunch of rough and tumble trade guys in a room that are trying to fight you, and you get them to believe that you mean it when you say what you say matters, we're saying we're going to build our master schedule based on what you say. That doesn't mean we're not going to question you or ask you to provide logic. But in the end, I'll tell you right now, if I had $100 bill and I had to bet on a trade duration or an estimator duration or a schedule, I'm taking the trade. So,
Mm.
so if you can get the troops to believe that you believe it, that's a big plus.
Yeah, and I mean, you're pointing at trust. I mean, that's what starts to, you're trusting each other for the handoffs, for commitment, for, you know, value creation at the top, etc. To build trust, sometimes you need to build rituals and things. You think of the New Zealand All Blacks with their, with the ritualistic dance that they do, or you think of other things yeah, exactly. Well, other things that you do in a locker room or a dressing room. Are there things,
Hey,
rituals that you could do? And I'm not talking about doing a dance. I can't imagine a YMCA thing happening on a job site, but are there sort of routines or rituals in the trailer or behaviors that help build the team? Like, are there things you can do to build trust besides going for a pint or, whatever?
yeah, well, trust is something you have to earn, right? A lot of times I ask people, think about the people in your life that you trust the most. Conjure up the image, close your eyes, who is it? And inevitably it's a family member, husband, wife, mother,
Yeah.
father, whatever. And the answer is they become to trust you because you can rely on them. All right. So this system functioning properly, you can rely on it. You're never going to create more certainty on a project, in my opinion, and not just because I do it, because I've seen it forever, the way we used to run work. And look, we can build a project without using Last Planner, it's not a magic wand. But if you do it right, and anybody out there, you guys know this that are doing it, if it's done right, the successes are strong and you want to do it again. And then people start to say, I don't know why we ever did it the other way. So anyway, so trust has to be built and takes time.
Yeah. Now I'm looking for more questions here. Right now we have a front runner on the book. Oh, Cam's doubling down.
Cam's the guy like in class who sits in the front row and keeps raising his hand, and then
Absolutely.
the
We like Cam.
teacher gives him a bump up on the grade because of his
That's right.
participation. You mentioned the correct roster for the huddle early during the selection process for any cluster group or planning team. How long do you typically evaluate the social interactions prior to coming to a conclusion? Safe to assume that when the connected conversation happens without effort. Ooh, man, I almost have to dissect that question.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
How long do you typically evaluate?
Well, you
How
are now
about,
a psychologist as well,
oh,
or sociologist.
I'm street smart, so that helps in that respect.
Yeah, that's right.
You know what? You do it forever. You know what I mean? That's not like something you say, okay, we're done evaluating how we're getting along and how we're communicating. It's just, I'm going to say it builds on the continued improvement aspect of things. And guess what? You guys notice too. You've been in rooms and teams where it just never gets right. Then you've been in rooms and teams where you could just feel the team just starting to come together week after week after week. So I'm going to say that it's kind of a constant thing. I hope that answers your question. Safe to assume that when the connected conversation happens. So you're talking about, I'm going to equate this. This is a psychological thing. There's stimulus, pause, response. Anybody remember that? So stimulus, yeah, good. So stimulus, pause, response means something happens. You pause for a minute to figure it out, then you do something, right? Well, if you watch a baseball team in a professional level baseball team run a triple play, they're not thinking, okay, they're reacting, and they're counting on the person being where they need to be. You know what I mean? So there's a lot to be said about, I'm going to say your connected conversation to happen without effort is when you've done it so often, you don't have to think about it. And that comes with time too.
Exactly.
And honestly, informed feedback. Just through the course of time, you just keep on looking at what's happening, offer ideas for improvement, and making sure that you also say, no, that's not what we're doing here.
Yeah.
So,
Go ahead, Laura.
I was actually going to just say that kind of brings into another question for you, Rich, and that's just really around the skills you mentioned around being a coach, being a facilitator. Like, what are some of those skills that superintendents and folks in the field should be aiming to develop to shift into that mindset? Because I think that's a big shift for a lot of folks to go from the kind of traditional command control, telling people what to do, to having to take more of a coach backseat role and actually facilitate and get others collaborating and contributing.
Yeah, that's a good one too. Honestly, it takes one-on-one discussions with people. I mean, superintendent are supposed to lead this event with the foreman. I know a lot of supers around the country that are in trouble, man. Heart attacks, open heart surgeries, alcoholism. I'm just saying, like, they're running hard, and you have to teach them. Look, I want you to trust me, and you don't know me, so I didn't earn it yet, right? But I can show you a way that you can gain more control in your project by giving up control. Okay. And so you got to, and people say, well, I think you're talking out of both sides of your mouth. And I go, no, I'm not. I go, if you're doing the Last Planner and your weekly sessions in the right format, you're just asking, not telling. Isn't it a lot easier to ask questions than it is to tell people stuff? Because nobody wants to be told anything, really. So that's how you start to move people away from command and control and get them into more of a coaching collaborative thing. Teach them to draw stuff out of people. Like,
Mm.
why did you say that? Or why do you got this duration? Or I didn't quite see it that way. Or what about this? And now you open a dialogue and you're giving people empowerment, which is another aspect of lean.
I like Cam's comment. Let go of the wheel and the car straightens out.
Yeah,
That's
especially
perfect.
nowadays. Hell, you don't even have to drive
Yeah,
anymore.
that's right. Yeah,
Just sit down.
it's
Anybody that's on the call, if you could remember that, because I'm heartfelt in that I believe I used to be a super. I used to run work, and I probably was more of a pusher, tough guy than I grew up in that era. But I know that if you can, and guys tell me, and there's a couple guys on this call right now that I think could provide testimony, right, Sean? How about giving me a thumbs up or something? But anyways, yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting parallel to the education. You said your wife was in curriculum development. It's interesting. There was a saying, the education system needed to move from sage on the stage to guide on the side. And it's, I don't know if you've heard that term, but it's very
I have
similar
not.
to what you're saying, command and control to facilitation and relinquishing. Well, you don't relinquish control. You can say you gain it. It's richer. People can add value then.
I mean, I always say share the pain.
Mm,
And I'm talking to specifically superintendents that are running these sessions. Share the pain. Because what I mean by that is everybody has to help make decisions and take on all the burdens of the job. Don't own it yourself, okay? That's what I try to tell people. And I honestly, I think this system just smooths things out in so many different ways if you allow it to.
mm. Sean did send you a thumbs up in the guise under the guise of a smiley. So there you go.
Thank you.
You can give him your book if you want. If you can vote for him.
He won't read it because he'll say he already knows it all.
Perfect. Well, I think at this point we're almost at time. Are there any other questions?
Not seeing any. I think so far Cam is in the lead on his question
I
asking.
think so. Cam, I
You can't
think
tell me there can't be one more question out here on this panel right now. Just one more. Somebody's got something on the tip of their
a
tongue.
really good one. Something
Put it out there.
obscure. Are you a winning coach? How about that one?
Am I a winning coach? Is that what you
Yeah,
said?
well, yeah, coaches get hired because they're winners.
Yeah, but they can't do shit without the team, right? So,
Good answer. Good
excuse my
answer.
language, but I'm sorry. I
No,
reverted back.
that's a good answer. No, somebody on our team used the word shit and it wasn't the best thing, but that's fine.
Sometimes shit's a good, like that's good shit. That's kind of fun.
It's a
Hey,
different.
Gary's got something.
Ah, in a world where job designs are ever more complicated, and I guess the project designs, budgets are consistently suspect, value engineering often continues right through to commissioning. How can the loss planner system be used to keep the team on track, even though it is ever changing?
Yeah, you just described the real world, buddy. I know that for sure, Gary.
Mm,
Honestly, I think that the last planner system gives us a higher degree of adaptability and flexibility because I mean we get into
mm,
a replan and repopulate. If you use your constraint log and your PPC with your variances log in a proper fashion and share it with people up and down the food chain, you draw them into that team environment where they start to recognize that the things that they're doing are impacting the work being put in place, frankly. So you try to get, I always encourage, and if I could demand it, I would, that the owners be involved in a lot of these sessions on a continuous basis, all the players that are running the play. And so if they're, and by the way, I think I call value engineering devalue engineering, but Anyway, at any rate, I hear you. I hope I did somewhat try to answer. Use the tools built into the last planner system to not only inform people, but to put them to put them in a position of accountability, so that things get done when you and if you could get it, like if you're ever involved in the last planner system and pre-construction and an IPD job, we're asking people like architects. I hope there's no architects on the phone, but if there is, I'm just saying you're not often interested in giving us your durations. Like, tell me when you get this done. So anyways, use the tools. Use all the tools of the last planner, and that probably might help.
Yeah, and you're inferring that that system actually helps you manage change, manage those issues that Gary's bringing up. I mean,
It's plan, do,
cool.
check, adjust. It's plan, do,
Exactly.
check, adjust. And look, we live in a fuzzy world. I have an old friend down in Southern Illinois, great guy, redneck, a lot of money, comes from the construction business, and he has a saying. He said, "What's right is right, and what's wrong is wrong, and there's no shade of gray in between." Well, we live in a world of gray. All right. All we're trying to do is improve. I'm starting to say like one or two words. Create certainty in your schedule.
Mm,
That's what this whole thing's all about, is creating certainty and predictability.
yeah, certainty is a great word. That's and understandable for sure.
I mean, well, we all would like certainty in our lives. We don't get it that much. And look, you never get perfect. So to seek to be the best that you can and land where you land and learn something, and then do it again, and then
Right
do it
on.
again, and then run it again, and then run it again.
Rich, this has been really insightful, and I thank you again for agreeing to take the time. And Laura, I don't know if you have any closing comments, and then we'll say so long till next time.
Well, Rick had a question here. Schedulers versus planners, can learning be two-way?
Ah,
I'm going to tell you, like, I just left Princeton and they got a designated scheduler. Well, it turns out this guy has some last planner experience, and I've worked with my fair of schedulers too. Um, if you can get a schedule, look, what we're looking for, the master schedule is constantly revised, and it's allowed for in the contract, right? And so guys know how to do it. You want your scheduler to be a friend of the last planner and understand that we're going to feed our phase pull work into your master schedule, and you're likely going to have the most reliable schedule you can get. And I think when I first got into this, the schedulers did not like this at all. Just my opinion, my observation. But it's changing, Rick, because I think they're starting to understand that the data that we can get from the guys in the field is important and accurate.
perfect.
I like Sean's comment. P6 is a guide and not the Bible.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that sums it up.
I've heard of you say it another way, but yeah.
Perfect.
All right.
All right, everyone. Thanks again,
Have a
Rich.
good day. Thank you. You're welcome.
Take care,
Bye.
everyone.